Hello and welcome. I'm Caroline Stockman, Chief Executive of the Association of Corporate Treasurers, and I'm really grateful to GTR for allowing us this session that's really focused on the corporate treasurer. And as you can see, I'm joined by three fantastic corporate treasurers. We've got Alex Ashby, Hayley Laverty and Jono Slade with us today. And I'd like to start by asking them to introduce themselves, just a little bit of their background. You've got their bios on the programme, so just a little bit about themselves and maybe a fact that you wouldn't necessarily know about them, something a little bit more private, so that we can get a sense of the human side of things in this virtual world we're living in at the moment. And so if I could start with you, Alex, would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course, thanks Caroline. Hi everyone, so my name is Alex Ashby. I'm Head of Treasury Markets at Tesco. Hopefully most people know Tesco, but it's a relatively large supermarket chain, mainly in the UK and in Eastern Europe. In terms of a bit about myself, I've been there 7 years leading various teams, and very much looking forward to talking to you today. My fact, I've had a lockdown baby. My son was born, he's now 5 months. It's already in 9 to 12 month clothing as of today, so he's relatively large and going strong.
Thanks very much, and congratulations. What's your son's name?
Sebastian or Sebi.
Sebi. Oh, lovely. Hayley, over to you.
Hi everyone, Hayley Laverty. I'm the Group Treasurer at IHG Hotels and Resorts. We've got about over 6,000 hotels globally, and hopefully most of you will have stayed in one from time to time. So the key brands being Intercontinental, Holiday Inn and Crowne Plaza. And the fact about me is that if I'm not working, I'm probably on the golf course.
Ah, keen golfer. Very good. And Jono.
Hi everyone, Jono Slade, the Group Treasurer of AstraZeneca. I think we're probably a better known company now in the current circumstances than we were in a pre-COVID world, but we're pleased to be playing a bit for society around the globe. My fact is that when I left KPMG and I was interviewing for Grad Met at the time, my second interview took place in a pub.
Oh, interesting. And also interesting that you were with KPMG, as was I in a previous life. Well, thank you all very much for those introductions. John, if I can stay with you, I'd just like to start by asking you a little bit about the last 15 months, how it's been for you as Group Treasurer of AstraZeneca. And many of us will probably think, well, must be a bit of plain sailing there. But what were the kind of the high points, the challenges and the learnings for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of corporates have really had to reflect on what goes on in their business and how they react to it. So I don't think anybody had plain sailing. I think there were pretty choppy waters. I think one of the things that I reflect on is that a crisis or adversity, and clearly what we've got with COVID is a global crisis. The things that were probably thought impossible or unwise to do have now been turned into reality. Yep. So the thought of hiring somebody that you've never physically met, you would never have done that sort of 18 months ago. Yeah, the fact that we've hopefully completing soon an acquisition, 39 billion or so, and never met the management face to face, you never would have done that. So there's all sorts of things I think that you thought were impossible or unwise that we've just taken in our stride, which I think just shows how flexible we are as a community. Clearly, we've done a lot of work on the vaccine, and it's probably like trying to open 25 different Tesco stores in countries around the world, or 25 different hotels. We had lots of different supply chains to stand up because we weren't a manufacturer of vaccines, but we're using third-party contractors for that. And so that brings a lot of pressure and tension and decisions that you need to make at pretty fast pace, and often very different circumstances. So lots to do. But I think, as ever, if there's some sort of unifying purpose for individuals or a team, you all work very hard to achieve that goal. It could be in sport or whatever, but you pull together and somehow you make it work. So yeah, not play sailing, lots of challenges, but I think we're generally coming out stronger at the end of it as a race or whatever.
Yeah, so many changes. It's incredible when you think back and all the phases that we went through over the last 15 months. Is there a particular high point that you felt at sometime during those 15 months, Jono?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to say I've worked on a project with such global significance as the vaccine. So playing my small part of thinking about the financial flows, the risk management on something which is potentially changing the globe, and in the UK here, getting people's freedom again. I'm just a very small part of the cog in the wheel, but without it, it won't work. Yeah, so I think that is pretty humbling, actually, that I've been fortunate enough to do that.
It takes me back to my Save the Children days, when you get up out of bed in the morning and you know that you're actually saving lives, or even now at the ACT that we, ensuring that there's professionalism and integrity amongst treasurers. Having that purpose it really does make you feel like getting out of that bed, as I say, whatever else is going on. So thank you very much, Jono. Just moving on to Alex, Tesco. Again, we might have an idea in our heads what it would be like for a supermarket in these times, but what was it actually like for Tesco, and what was it like for the Treasury team and yourself?
Yeah, of course, Caroline. Well, yeah, very interesting place you're working, much like Jono, and I'm sure Hayley as well. I think all businesses have had to reinvent themselves really over the last year, 18 months, and for us, we've been no different. I mean, I think it's very frantic. I mean, selfishly, a lot of this hit around March, April time last year, which is our year end as well. So just from a head office perspective, crazy. But I mean, thinking about the store staff and people working, I think we hired 50,000 temporary staff in a matter of months. We've managed to keep on about 20,000 of them due to the growth in online. Tesco's went from 600,000 slots a week of online delivery to 1.5 million. And we managed to, I think that we doubled. It got to 1 million in about 5 weeks. I'm still not even sure how that happened, to be honest. I know the numbers, but it sounds like it sounds remarkable to me that we did that. And I think one of my personal highlights, I know we got a list around sort of in March time from the government of 110,000 sort of critically vulnerable people, and I think we set ourselves a target to get hold of them within a week, and we got hold of I think 75,000 of them within a week and got them a slot, which is just amazing, And bearing in mind the call centres are understaffed, people are off sick, and they're getting more calls than they've ever had before ever. On top of that, it's just fantastic. So, and similarly, we did our little part. I mean, even the Treasury team, I know we were all called up. We've done a few days in store around that as well, which was quite an experience. Empty shelves and so forth, trying to replenish things faster than they go out. But no, in terms of how it was, I mean, it was a great experience. I think a real kind of coming together of colleagues, be it wherever we're from in the business, to just do the right thing, if that makes sense, and feed Britain. But yeah, from a Treasury perspective, unspeakably busy. I mean, if you think about even things like cash forecasting, how does one manage your cash when you've got stockpiling, eat out to help out, people cancelling holidays, fuel sales dropping because no one's driving, then suddenly they come back again because lockdown eases. Just even that in itself is a crazy experience. And I mean, I personally was heavily involved in the supply chain side and getting cash to our suppliers. We started paying our smaller suppliers immediately, which was in itself great. We've extended that to March 22, but not just that, we set up some additional financing options for some of our goods not for resale suppliers. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think ultimately it was kind of all hands on deck from every angle, and a real experience, but a really nice way of bringing everyone together from a kind of corporate sense, and as well as the thousands of colleagues in store.
Yeah, I remember in the early days, should I say, speaking to your boss, Linda, and she, I think it was a couple of times a week from 5 till 8, she was stocking shelves. And it was, again, there's kind of, I don't know if it's the right word in this context, but humbling experiences, as Jono reflected on, doing something for the greater good. And it's important that people have food and that the shelves are stocked and so on and so forth. That's really interesting, and that thought as well about the supply chain. And I know many of the treasurers we spoke to during particularly the initial periods were looking at the whole ecosystem, and it's not just about themselves. I remember in fact speaking to Jono about it, and Linda, thinking about what's happening with our suppliers, so that what can we do to ensure that we don't have disruption in that supply chain. So absolutely fascinating, and probably very, I don't know if fascinating is the right word, Hayley, but moving to you, we've probably all got a view on what it might be like for a hotel business during the past 15 months, but what we don't really know, and we don't really know what it's like for a group treasurer of a hotel chain, so, or series of chains, in fact. So, Hayley, for you, what were the challenges, learnings, high points, low points?
Yeah, I think all of those happened at some point during the process of the last 15 months or so. So I think right from the start, just as I don't think we could have imagined before it happened, but the amount of uncertainty that we were trying to plan the business on from a hotel point of view was, like nothing we'd ever experienced previously. So for those of you that don't know, IHG is mainly a franchise business. So we're not necessarily relying on collecting cash from the end customer, but actually from our hotel owners, and trying to sort of plan that from a cash flow forecasting perspective and try and work out how they might react and what they might do. Would they continue to pay us? Would they not? What actually would be the impact on them? How many hotels would close? How many would stay open with sort of lower levels of activity was extremely difficult. And going back to last, say, March, April, from a Treasury team point of view, there's a huge focus on improving our cash flow forecasting processes, sometimes at a quite granular level that normally we wouldn't need to. So normally IHG is a very, very cash generative business. Our focus, on an annual basis is how to manage those cash inflows. And over the past 10 years, we've done a huge amount of special dividends back to shareholders. So we found ourselves literally in the kind of opposite situation. So we spent some time just, we've got a relatively small treasury team, so just trying to make sure that some of the easy things were done very, very quickly, and funding a lot of our overseas subsidiaries, sometimes with sort of 3 months worth of cash, just to get them going, so that we could then focus as a team on the wider and sort of slightly more medium and longer term picture from a group point of view. So there was a huge amount of teamwork between the treasury team and the FP&A team, trying to come up with scenarios and models, which sometimes felt like they were moving hourly, literally. The severe downside scenario all of a sudden got kind of bumped up to the downside scenario, and there was a new severe downside scenario. So trying to plan that and then trying to work out the impact from a funding perspective and what actions we might need to take obviously required a huge amount of input from the whole team, so that we could go and talk to our bank group about our bank covenants, so that we could apply for the Bank of England CCFF facility, which we did, and drew down 600 million on that. And later on, kind of looking at our bonds, long-term funding as well, which we did later on in the year. So yeah, and then, coupled with that, you can imagine, we were talking to the board on a regular basis and the EC and updating them on where we were. And and obviously keeping the rating, talking to the rating agencies as well, and making sure that they understood, well, at least what we were basing our scenarios and planning on, which some of them are quite extreme scenarios, but it was not something we'd obviously been through before. So we had a whole range that we were looking at.
Yeah, and you said teamwork, vital, of course. We're hearing a lot about that. So the ACT carries out research every year, sort of a random selection of 200 or so treasurers around the globe. And this year it was quite interesting in some of the more qualitative comments that people made unprompted. They did talk, several people talked about trust and how trust had increased. And I think that seems to be reflected in what we've all said so far, that the team has got closer. I suppose it's a human thing, isn't it? When you go through adverse times together, you don't forget that. And these are, people say the word's overused, but certainly unprecedented times. A curious thing that we've also seen is through, maybe not so curious actually, there's a lot of common sense in it, but the ESG, and in particular the environmental side as well as social, I'd say, has kind of accelerated in the sense that more people are focusing on it, boards are focusing on it. And you might have imagined if people are busy with a pandemic, they're not going to focus on other things that might be seen as nice to have. But it's worked very, very differently. And I just wondered, Hayley, if I stay with you, have you seen that kind of trend of acceleration? And does that apply to IHG at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd sort of necessarily call it an acceleration as such, because we already had kind of a large program in place prior to COVID. It's probably fair to say that the publication of some of, what we've been doing or what we've wanted to do in terms of being able to take sort of material steps forward was probably delayed until earlier this year. So we launched our new framework to 2030, which is, called Care for Our People, Communities and Planet. And then that's also at a board level, kind of one of our strategic kind of pillars now as well. So it's certainly kind of right up there alongside, the rest of our sort of global strategy. So I think that, will be increasingly important going forwards, and hopefully as the recovery continues, the business can make really good strides against that plan.
Thanks, Hayley. Jono, what's your view around this acceleration of ESG or not, and how does that apply to AstraZeneca?
Well, the very fact that we're in vaccines, I think, is part of our response, because in the UK we had a flu vaccine, but it's pretty small, and therefore it's not a core competence. But we saw that we could play a role, and we've stepped in and done that, and we said that we're doing it not for profit during the pandemic period. Now, so the fact that there's probably a lot of people on this call that have got AZ vaccines in them is because we've sort of stepped up and tried to do that role that we thought would be helpful. But we weren't an out-and-out vaccine company. If you go back 18 months, we had a flu product. That was it. So that's obviously a big thing, and that fits under our access to medicines banner of our sustainability piece. But I think if you just look around stuff that we do in our own lives now, we're at home. I guess I'm probably from the school that you would probably print a lot of things and read it. I could read a lot of stuff better in front of me if it's a loan document or something than if it's on screen. But I guess during this period, I've learned to print a lot less. And I don't know, I maybe have printed 100 pages. So I printed that loan document probably twice over the last 15 months, and everything else has been on screen. So that helps. Things like electronic signing of things makes you more efficient. There's less paper involved. So I suspect everybody in their working lives has done something for that sort of use of paper around the office. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what we do when we go back into the offices on a more permanent basis, whether we revert to chopping down trees every day or whether we manage just to use electronic devices and storage a lot more.
It would be great to see that, because as you say, if you add it all up, to all of us, with this reduced use of paper, then that must be huge. And
unless you're a paper company.
Yes.
That's maybe not so good if you're a Swedish or a Finnish pulp company.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it would be very interesting actually to look at their sales and see what is happening. But yes, so hopefully we will keep some good habits moving forwards, even if it is to their detriment potentially. Alex, you've been very busy in this area, I know. Would you like to tell us some more?
No, yeah, I'd love to. Again, a very, very passionate area of mine, and Tesco's, I guess. I mean, I think as others have said, we've got a very well-established sustainability framework. For us, it's the Little Helps plan, which has been around, I think it's 2017, or that's when we published it, but before then, really in various forms, focused on people, places, product, and planet. But I mean, and that's continued to drive, and there's loads of targets there linked to the various UN goals that as most corporates have. But I think, particularly in the last 18 months as a Treasury team, we've been incredibly busy on a number of initiatives. I mean, we came up with the concept of having more linkage to our financing. So we had a sort of sustainability linked financing framework, and we started that September 20 with our revolving credit facility linking to 3 KPIs, so greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, and food waste, which are core to our business. And then we've extended that since then. I say extended it, I wasn't actually around, but we did a sustainability linked bond in January. I was on parental leave, but the team did a fantastic job, and that was using, again, scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. I think that was incredibly well received by the market. We had a few firsts. It was the first by an LSE corporate order book over 5 billion for a 750 bond. So, just a great reaction. To be honest, the feedback we had from investors, I heard secondary, but was brilliant. Everyone thought it was fantastic and sort of wanted more, really. So I think it's a great doing our little part there with regards to that. And I think it's becoming very mainstream now, isn't it, in terms of how people look at that side of financing. And then another initiative was actually what I led was relaunching our supplier financing, so supply chain finance, so where suppliers can get paid on their invoices early if they choose. It's completely optional, but they're able to get paid at a low cost of funding using Tesco's credit risk. So we've relaunched that as well with a link focusing on planet, so greenhouse gas emissions, again with a kind of annual test and survey for suppliers to complete, and we've been able to achieve, sort of, if they get the top standard, a 20% reduction in pricing for suppliers, which is fantastic through the through the bank group financing that. So generally, quite busy, I say. And I guess one other project of mine is actually sourcing the renewable energy with developers, which we've done a lot on. Maybe not classic Treasury, but we've signed 9 power purchase agreements to build 5 new wind farms and 4 new solar farms, and a lot more to come. That's only a fifth of our energy demand covered, and there's a lot more to go and to be announced in the not distant future. So yeah, a great area of focus. And to be honest, it's fantastic when you have such a company such as Tesco really actually sort of driving action in this space. We've got a real buy-in from exec and board levels to go and drive these things and lead in an advocacy approach, which is maybe quite a nice refreshing change for us and for me personally.
But Caroline, on that, I don't think people have stopped doing stuff because of the pandemic. If you just go into a supermarket, it doesn't have to be Tesco, but the amount of packaging that you get now is a lot less. I think people are much more aware of that. Whatever you're buying, I don't know, notice of the day that toilet roll now comes in a paper wrapping more than a plastic one. Yeah, the amount of plastic that's used is generally down on things. So it's not like people stop doing the stuff that they planned because of the pandemic. It's been amazing what people continue to do from their home offices, or from, might be not offices, maybe it's from their bedrooms. It's all sorts of things where people have worked, and we've accepted that and embraced that. And I think that is amazing that what we've been able to achieve. If you think about it, if you'd said to people, look, you're going to work from home for the next 15 months and you're going to carry on delivering all the targets that you plan as a corporate, they'd say you're bonkers.
Absolutely. And just on that point, and I'd like to turn to the people side of things, and we've also got a question coming in that fits very, very nicely. And do keep your questions coming in. I can see them coming up, and we will hopefully get round to all of them. But Alex, if I could just start with you, what were the kind of people issues that you experienced over the last 18 months in terms of the Treasury team in particular? Here we go. I knew that would happen. Doorbell, dog, I did predict, and I did hope it wouldn't happen when I was speaking, but of course. But I'll shut myself up in a moment. But one of the questions that come in, they're asking how the panel thinks the development of the younger team members has been impacted and the lack of personal contact. So if I can turn to you, Alex, to cover off some of that, please.
Exactly. That's actually part of what I had thought about sharing anyway, to be honest, on this. It's a really topical thing. But yeah, I think, as Jono said, I mean, look, remote working is crazy, isn't it? It's weird how we've had, I don't know, someone said like 10 years worth of, I guess, evolution in, probably a matter of months, haven't we, in terms of suddenly things working. I don't know how many times I tried to log into an exec or board meeting and the tech never works, you end up on the phone. And, we've seemed to have fixed that so rapidly, and it's fantastic, which I quite like. I think some larger meetings actually work better like that, with a good chairperson going around the houses on it and so on. So I think for me, it's very good. And exactly the point to the question asked, I think for me, from a transactional perspective, it works great. We're able to do our jobs, we've proven it. I know there's various people who thought, oh, you can't trade at home, and even the banks have evolved that. I know a few have been in, but quite a lot of people haven't really. And a lot of people have been doing things that were traditionally office-only roles, suddenly just flipped, if you know what I mean. So I think that's fantastic, and technology is great. But exactly what to that question, I think one of the things that really gets missed is that development. It's being able to have that chat around, I don't know, around the water cooler over a coffee, or in the corridor, or on the walk back from a meeting. Some of those can be the most important bits, particularly for the younger teams. We've had every year we have a graduate intake, and they haven't met each other until I think very relatively recently. And we normally have quite a structured process for them, so it must be so bizarre. And I've got a few colleagues in Treasury as well that have joined, and again, we've only met once or twice since they've joined, and they've joined a company virtually. Again, even our CFO Imran, who just joined, was virtual until he's been around the last few weeks in the office. Now we've gone back, but yeah, it's a really odd one. And I think for me as well, that kind of, I don't know, brainstorming, that kind of piece. I've had a few projects, and trying to do that on teleconferencing is just horrifically hard. You can't go and do a nice whiteboarding session or something. I'm a bit of a geek. I do quite like having a pen in hand and people around the table. It's quite a nice way of producing, and in that environment where you're collaborating with IT and other colleagues around the business. So I think it's been okay. But in terms of the impact of the team, I mean, we've got quite a global team. We've got a huge team in India, obviously supporting Tesco in our service centre there, and they've been hit more recently, obviously in the UK. So for me, there's been quite a different phasing. It's almost kind of not gone away, but moved around into different geographies for us. So we've had to be very mindful of that. We recently loosened a load of KPIs and SLAs for our India team, because they were just a lot of them were off, or if they weren't off themselves, they had family that were affected, and just to give people that mind space. So I think for me, that kind of mental well-being angle is the key thing for me, and just making sure we think through that, because it's quite easy to look okay and wear a shirt and look smart on a video call when really you're thinking about everything but what you're doing. So for me, that's there. But yeah, definitely development, well-being. But overall, I think people have coped really well, and the tech has jumped up to meet the challenge.
No, it is amazing how people have coped, and yet the statistics do show that there's a lot of mental ill health out there now, and that's not surprising, is it? Hayley, moving over to you, can you tell us a little bit about your team and experience over the last while, and anything also about bringing on younger members of the team in particular?
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Alex said, to be honest, in terms of how it has been for the team. And we've also actually got our finance service centre in India. So again, we have been hit more recently through that. So just when you kind of think you were, everyone was sort of getting back to normal-ish, or they were used to the normal working environment, that was quite a significant impact. So like you say, sort of to be mindful of that, and how to manage that and reduce the pressure, on the teams out there for what they were going through. And I think personally for our teams, obviously it was also difficult throughout last year, because we did put a large number of staff on furlough at points, or unfortunately have to make some redundancies kind of later on in the year when unfortunately we couldn't avoid it. So I think there was an underlying concern from a Treasury team point of view as well, that they could be affected by that. I'm glad to say that no one has been affected by that in the Treasury team kind of longer term. But I think, when you're working in that environment, that's kind of, you have to be aware that that's very stressful, for the whole team, around kind of, the conditions that they, especially considering what we were requiring of them, throughout that period, and the amount of work that they had to do. So, and I think in terms of, the younger or newer members of the team, I definitely think some of them, have taken to it really well, and actually really like the working from home. And then there are others that actually haven't taken to it so well and would prefer to be back in an office environment, like you say, with what Alex was saying about all the little things that you learn because you're just sitting near people and you just hear things. They kind of are missing out to an extent on some of those sorts of things. So sometimes it is just a case of kind of I think you don't want to over invite people to meetings and calls and things like that, but actually sometimes having kind of the regular check-ins and inviting those team members just so they're hearing some of the conversations that are going on, just like they would in the office, is important.
Absolutely. And John, you started, in fact, talking about the people side of things and hiring people that you've never met before. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how it's been for your team and also younger members of the team, etc.?
Yeah, I draw a distinction that it's not just the younger members of the team that are sort of missing out, it's everybody, yeah. Because you hear a conversation out the back of your ear and that's helpful. It doesn't matter whether you're new in or you've been in the company 30 years. It's that connectivity, it's joining the dots, which is a lot harder, which I think a lot of the calls we have today are very functional. You come to a meeting, you do the stuff, and you sort of bugger off. You don't, as Alex said, that sort of chat on the way back from a meeting, or you build a relationship with your external person. One of the things that we did right from the outset is we have a 10:30 team call every day. Yep, and everybody tries to make it. And I encourage people to put cameras on. And I think one of the things that people forget, often you do a team call or something without visuals. And you, certainly in my case, you appreciate all the sort of non-verbal communication that you get. You can't see somebody smiling or nodding if you just hear the voice. So to me, it'll be odd going back to the phone when you don't have a picture. So I can see technology will move on and you'll do much more video calling where you would have just had a phone call with somebody in the past, yeah, because you get a lot more out of it. I think, as I think Alex said, that you can have people from around the place, around the globe, on a call a lot quicker, which you wouldn't have been able to do before. Yeah, so I think that's all very helpful. I think the other thing is that we've probably learned is what's really important. So the fact that your dog barks or the cat walks across the keyboard or your kid comes in and wants to have a chat with you, I think it's brilliant. Yeah. Perfectly acceptable, and I don't think really anybody worries about it these days. There would have been a thing of, oh crikey, they've got a polo shirt on or they've got a tie or a jacket, that's really rude or whatever. We've now worked out what's important. And it's the advice that you get from somebody, it's the input you get from them. It's not what they're wearing or what they look like. So it is, maybe that plays to sort of the inclusion piece, that you take people for what they give, not what they might look like or how they dress. I think what's going to be interesting is because Pandora's box has been opened on the flexible working, how that will play out. And I think we might need to learn to go back into the office. As odd as it may sound, yeah, we got dumped into this really quickly and everybody's sort of at home. I think we'll have to learn how to interact back in the office and how that works, because not everybody are there the whole time. How do you structure meetings and make sure people feel they're still part of it if 8% of people are in and 20% are not? At the moment, I suggest that most people are out of the office, and it's 20% of people might be in. Yeah, so I think there's a new dynamic for us to work through, which I'm not sure that we've thought about a lot actually. So I think there are some pros, but there's certainly been some cons of not having the face-to-face. It's quite hard to have a beer with somebody over a video chat. You can do it, but it's not the same. I know the ACT's done its sort of annual dinner and things, and they work pretty well, but it's not the same as having a chat with somebody, is it? Over a pint or whatever your tipple is.
No, it's not quite the same, is it? But it's interesting. I think initially a lot of people were saying, oh, it's really awful and you can't get body language and you can't this and you can't that. I was speaking with Callie Beaton, who is our guest speaker at our Deals of the Year awards next week. And she's a fascinating woman, very entertaining. But and she's, you know, a lot of her life's been spent in media and with big TV broadcasting companies. And she was saying, isn't it funny, because many people spend a lot of their leisure time doing that very thing, watching a screen, and had no problems with that. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, but that it's because on the other side of the screen they're acting. And I think we all need to learn maybe a little bit more, you know, brush up our acting skills so that we, you know, give across more through the screen, perhaps. But thank you very much for that, Jono. I've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'll pause on what I was going to go on to next to just ask a few of these quickly so we don't miss them, some of these excellent questions that our audience have posed. There's one, it's a question actually for Alex. It says, to what extent did the early days of the pandemic, we all recall images of supermarket shelves, result in a reset when it came to supplier relations?
Oh God, that's a good question. I think, to be honest, for me, and I think for all our commercial colleagues, I mean, I think it really showed the importance of that partnership concept. You know, a supplier is not someone to be tendered every 6 or 12 months. You know, for us, we part of our turnaround plan was always building longer relationships, having longer contracts with people and working there. I mean, if you see, I'm sure there's a few, I won't name any names, but, you know, we absolutely stood behind, for example, our clothing orders, and not, you know, a number of other brands in that space did not all change their tune. So, you know, that was a decision from the get-go, really, that we have to stand behind our suppliers across the board, as I mentioned. You know, and the thing is, when you've got the breadth of Tesco, yes, we work with huge corporations, FMCGs like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, but you go all the way down. I mean, we've got a food incubator with startups in that we work with, and we try and support all the way through to that kind of own label middle, where we have people manufacturing Tesco own brand goods. They're not huge. A lot of these companies are 2-3 billion revenue, all the way down to sort of hundreds of millions. So, you know, they're not super resilient. Most aren't investment grade. They can't just go and raise cash. So, you know, for us, that partnership angle is just so important. And understanding that, you know, we had a load of dialogue. I mean, most of the effort we spent was us and our finance and commercial colleagues all working together to understand suppliers and what their needs are. Not really challenging if they've got an issue. If they've got an issue, we've got an issue. Ultimately, we needed as much inventory as possible of them. And actually, when you ask people for more and they're bringing it in on terms, they may have cash issues, and we actually work to resolve them with them. So for me, just to reiterate, absolutely across the board partnership. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked, and there would have been more empty shelves than we saw.
Yeah, I think one of the eye-opening things is just how multinational supply chains are. Because I remember at the time, I had a week of, I was actually physically in America at the start of March last year. There's a lot of questions about China and the supply chain there, because at that point they thought it was just a China issue. But you realize the knock-on impact of somewhere in the supply chain is not working. And you might not think it's anything to do with you, but it does impact your thing. So it proves, I think, free trade unencumbered is absolutely critical for the society today to work. Otherwise, you know, something in the Tesco supply chain won't work because, right, somebody can't do something in their factory which provides them something. Yeah. So that was probably a little bit of an eye-opener to me. I hadn't quite realised it. It's obvious, really, that it's so interdependent, and many levels upstream is what could impact your critical piece.
And there's, interestingly, one of the questions that's come in relates to that point. Or the person is asking, to what extent does supply chain nationalism place additional pressures on the Treasury function? Have you experienced that, Jono, or any of the others?
I don't think you can actually have a national supply chain anymore. Don't think it's possible. Yeah. For example, if any of you've got electricity in your house, probably use copper wire. How many copper mines do we have in the UK? Okay, question answered.
Well, I would say we are able to grow lettuces and a few things occasionally around the year, but to Jono's point, quite often, if you think about it, they'll be imported. So, you know, at a certain point in the year, you know, tomatoes come from the UK, great, but they come from Spain and Latin America at other times. So I think even when you think about something as simple as fresh produce, even that is seasonal and comes around. We probably grow enough onions for ourselves, but that's probably a guess, I'm not sure. But if you know what I mean, it really is quite seasonal, even in fresh food, thinking about that opportunity. And there's so much talk about this with steel and all the other topics. Copper is when I said, like in terms of where we are, I honestly think that it's going to be more the exception if it is possible. And even then, it might only be for a certain part of the year if it's anything to do with food.
Yeah. Thank you. Question I'm going to ask you, Hayley, simply because you haven't spoken in a while. But do you believe, is the Treasurer now expected to act as an ambassador on issues such as ESG? And is it something that sits comfortably with the panel, is the question.
Well, I suppose, if I would say everybody has a responsibility to ESG, and obviously the Treasurer is kind of well placed, really, I think, within a corporate in terms of, as Alex has sort of talked about, the link in with in the financial markets as well, in terms of telling the story externally, and there's a responsibility there. And from where you're just placed, naturally kind of at the center of the business, you have access to all the different teams, probably speaking to teams globally, where you can certainly learn yourself and, share that information amongst your teams and the wider teams to try and help all of the relevant parts of the ESG kind of framework.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. We've still got a few more questions, so I'm going to stick with the questions so that our audience gets theirs answered. Brexit, has that impacted your supply chains? Anyone care to?
Yeah, it did, because medicines need to get approved for country use, and there used to be a European-wide one, and now the UK and the Central European are separate, and therefore we did do a bit of stockpiling a number of times, because we had a number of events that could have been called Brexit, such that patients could still get hold of their medicines. So in the end, because it was such a long lead time, we'd found alternative ways of getting product from the UK into Europe and vice versa. So in the essence, it didn't impact supply to patients, but I think it's a bit like Y2K, for those of you who remember that. A lot of work was done in the IT community, and because of that, it was never an issue. I think Brexit effectively was the same, huge amounts of work done. I don't think there was, we did have lettuces on our shelves, despite some people saying we wouldn't have any fresh veg, etc. But I think it was a lot of hard work across a lot of corporates that managed that wasn't an issue.
Yeah. Thank you. If I could just stay with you, John, and ask you a little bit about technology. Our Business of Treasury research again is showing us that a lot of the investment made last year was around the kind of the working from home part, and a certain amount also in trying to prevent cybercrime, because again, people saw an acceleration in cybercrime through the period, but a bit of a halt on larger scale sort of implementations, such as a new TMS, etc. What's been the experience of AstraZeneca in relation to technology and Treasury technology?
Yeah, actually, we were due to go live with a complete system re-implementation for Treasury in the May. At the end of March, we put a halt on that, but we went live in August. So again, a project that you never would have said, do from home, do remotely, we need to be together to solve issues, etc. We said we need to do it, and you just plan differently. And so we did a lot of testing, more testing than you ordinarily. But yeah, we put effectively a brand new version of our TMS in from scratch. So luckily on day one we weren't really impacted. We already had the ability to log on from home, etc. And therefore we used the VPN, and therefore I effectively used AZ Cybersecurity rather than sort of anything on my own. And I think for a lot of corporates, they were, I think, generally okay. Certainly the larger ones, it wasn't so much an issue. I remember the biggest issue we had was getting screens, because we said, look, we don't want people to be working on just their laptop screens. Can we go and buy some screens? And you couldn't get hold of them. It was a bit like toilet paper back in March, April time. You couldn't get hold of them. You're very lucky, or there was a long wait. But actually, a lot of people, I think, moan about Zoom calls and Teams. But I'd say to people, what would it have been like without that type of technology? Yeah, we would not be having this call today. You wouldn't have been able to interact with people. You'd have done stuff on the phone. It would have been terrible. And I was surprised how resilient the internet was. If you think a lot of people at home working, homeschooling, watching videos or whatever, the internet has been absolutely amazing in my view. Internet companies, because I don't think really there's been a big issue. If you think about the demands, a bit like Tesco said, you went from 500,000 to 1 million plus people. It's probably the same type of thing for the internet. Bang, you've got loads of people working. I just think it's been just fantastic.
This is amazing, isn't it? Alex, any quick words? I know we're coming towards the end, but quick words on technology for Tesco?
Yeah, sure. Similar to John O, I think for the BAU stuff. But yeah, we've definitely noticed a bit more, a little bit more cyber stuff coming through. Definitely, again, not super involved, but I mean, personally, I had a text this morning with the fake Royal Mail thing. I think there's just more people are doing this due to the fact that more people are at home, therefore there's less avenues. So I think that's just maybe here to stay, unfortunately. But yeah, we're looking to start TMS upgrade and so on, and also looking at some of the learnings really from this. Like I mentioned cash forecasting earlier, we're really trying to standardize and do a bit more work. It was sort of similar, but really just sort of go through, like, for example, how European businesses look at things and really try and bring that together, looking at kind of operating models and things. Now it's a real good opportunity to reflect a little bit on learnings from the past 18 months and the frantic, if that makes sense. So we're kind of trying to bed in a few bits of that really at the moment.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Thank you. Hayley, technology.
Yeah, so I think, just before COVID happened, in sort of like March last year, we actually were about to commence a project for a new payments platform and TMS implementation. So we did have to kind of review the timescales and the implementation of that, taking into account the fact that people would be working from home, and also from a budget perspective. Needless to say, kind of quite a lot of projects around the business did get stopped in March last year. But we were fortunate enough that the TMS and the payments platform still got budget approval to continue. If anything, I think it shows that in a crisis like this, actually those systems become that much more important. So actually kind of, sort of assisted the business case by itself. We just spread out the implementation, and we're just about finishing it off now, so that there wasn't too much pressure on the employees. Like you say, some of these things you really do want to be in a room together, and I'm sure kind of, in the future there will be things that we sort of tweak as we go along, because if we'd have been in a room together, we probably might have done something slightly differently. But the fact that we have been able to do it remotely, I think it is really amazing.
Absolutely. And now I'm sorry we don't have time for more of the questions coming in from the audience, but thank you for all the questions. I'd like to, in closing, ask the panel for a very open question. So starting maybe with you, Hayley, any short, 30 seconds we'll give you, short words of advice or personal learnings from the last 18 months to share with the audience?
I think if you have a great culture at a company, and you have and you have the teams there, it's actually amazing what you yourself and what the teams are actually capable of doing. If you'd have said to me at the start of this that we would have done everything we did last year and continuing through to now, and doing it all remotely, I just would have said it was just not possible without sort of another 5 team members or something. So no, it has been a really great experience from that point of view, from a team point of view.
Thanks, Hayley. Jono, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I'd say think what's really important. Is that what's important in your family life, what's important at work, how do you prioritize things? And I think we've got over the things that cats walking across a keyboard and stuff isn't really important. Yeah. So that to me has been really the thing, focusing on what really is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I think, taking a step back, I think is so valuable. I think with what's been happening, it's been going at such a pace, reflect. And I think one thing for me is trying to have a little bit more, even longer term, having a think strategically, not 2, 3, 5 years, the usual, having a little bit longer term and seeing really what's coming on that horizon is something that I've reflected on and thought about the last few years. But yeah, that, and obviously keeping an eye on your teams and making sure everyone's doing well. But no, it's been a real fantastic collaborative effort, I think, in all industries from what I've seen and heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots to celebrate, really, when we do get back together. I just want to then thank the panel. It's been a fantastic speaking with you today. We could have gone on a lot longer, but what we've heard, I hope that the audience will find really insightful. I certainly did myself. Thanks to GTR for hosting us. I hope everyone has enjoyed the last 2 days, and in particular, perhaps the studio session where people were actually physically together. That's always very exciting, isn't it? And do remember, if you have missed any content or want to see something again, it's all available for the next 6 months. So do feel free to dip in and out, because there's lots. We're all very busy, so we can't always watch everything live. So do take advantage of it over the next 6 months. And thank you all once again. Roll on the next conference. Looking forward to it. Take care, everyone.